Okay, we enter part 4 in this, and I had to edit it back to this point. I did a misedit during one part of it, and that just kind of screwed up everything. And then I had already thrown away the original because I thought that it had done it correctly, because for my version I looked at it, it had done it correctly again, but never here nor there. So we'll go through some of this again, and I'll actually mention more of this in this series right here that's showing the connections between the earliest Egyptian beliefs and pantheons connecting to what's in the Bible. But it also makes a connection in astrotheology, and you can tell that they use the same thing. This is another connection that I said just in passing whenever we were talking about the connections to the ancient Sumerians and how they had come in, and the Gebel Arak knife and the iconography that's shown on the Narmer palette and everything that goes along with it. But I just kind of mentioned it in passing, but whenever you look at that, I mean, it's just a mention, it's just a couple of words I said, but it actually means a whole lot. I have trouble whenever I make these videos because I'll hit on a certain word and it'll key me on in that web in my mind of all these things, and all of a sudden I'll go off in a tangent, or I think tangents without talking, and have 2 or 3 things going on at once sometimes. Let's just look at some of these connections that are shown here. For they tell you that Isis was taken by Horus in adultery by Sut. Of course, there's part of the Bible that the woman was taken in adultery, whether you believe in the idea that there was a Roman legion guy named Panthera, or whatever, or somehow she was just pregnant, or a magical angel came down and impregnated her and woo, or whatever they try to look at it. Sure, that's different. I admit that 1000%. The problem is there's too many connections. I've already gone through like 40 of them here or so. I don't know exactly if I went to look back up to the top and start it and make a count of this. But this is actually a modified list of the list that I had before, because that was at least 2 pages. And these are connections between these. But let me be totally frank with you about all of this. This idea that he somehow, they somehow made a perfect connection with it and everything, and it's just like it, is not true. It's actually taking from a bunch of different people, and the similarities are because they went off a belief system that was there before writing actually was. And I've tried to show this in about 30 other ways, and there will be an upcoming series going through this effect again. Because once you get back to a certain point, it all kinds of fades out. But I've tried to show you the archaeology that shows you many places and things that happened, and ancient concrete, all the stuff, things they found in Göbekli Tepe, or the Tastapeller site that they have there now. And that doesn't look like it's brand new either, does it? Well, because it's not. But that's for other videos. So I'll just read off a few connections here that you might be able to make an assimilation with. Now, I admit that, again, it's not like a perfect connection with a lot of these. In fact, you could say, well, some of these would get a gold star, but other ones would get a silver star, or maybe just a dot or a check mark, like, yeah, maybe, or a question mark. Problem with it is that, as we talked about before, there's a mathematician that got a hold of this, and he said, you know, direct connections, like a gold star, you would only be able to go through a few of those, and then it would become 1 in a million. And because the way mathematics works, if you took it a few more than that, it would be 1 in an undecipherable number that just has a number hedged below it to the something power. It gets to the point where it's, in other words, undeniable. Now, this same mathematic equation can be used in all kinds of ways. This same mathematical equation was used to find, was it Uranus? That they didn't know, but they said it was supposed to be there, and they used an equation like this, and then come to find it, and they said, well, if it's here, it's going to be 1 in a million, and if they could track it 2 more times, and it was there, then it would be there. Science is amazing like that. It doesn't just take off, oh, I saw it. They want somebody else to see it. Now there's got to be a group to verify that. And by the way, it's moving all the time, so they're going to verify it. Once it got to the last third point there, it's undeniable. Same thing happens with a lot of other science, and you can look at theology as being a science in a weird way, or the fact of finding out the truth of it as a science in some way, because you have to apply the scientific methods to it. Because some things are so weak, it seems like, well, I can easily write that off, or write this off, or write that off. But just like this list of 164 different things, or whatever it is, you can't write all this off. It gets to the point where, like, it's disgusting. What's so disgusting is you're brought up as a kid and everything to believe those pagan beliefs were all faked and all this, that, and the other, but they found the one true God. Like all of the hundreds of gods that were talked about and everything, and that they verified all these things happen and so on, none of that was happened, but ours really did. Somehow. Let's continue here. So Seb, the earth father, as a consort to the Virgin of Isis, and Joseph, the father, on earth, but in that position. See, because, a lot of people make fun of the fact that, well, if the angel came down and did all that, then Joseph isn't the father of God, so he doesn't even fall in the line of David and all this, and they try to make other apologies. That's because people didn't think that through this good enough whenever they did it in the first place. But it was something that at the time and well after, it got mulled over with all the other BS going on. That little concept there got mulled over. I mean, you can talk about it for a few minutes and get past it with people, maybe. This is the beginning of apologetics, where they start making up excuses for whenever you use logic toward it. You're like, that doesn't make any sense. How come we don't see any of this cool stuff anymore? Where's the talking snakes at? And the talking donkeys? Well, they're up in the stars, like I've been showing you here. That's a magical talking donkey, just like in Shrek. In fact, it's the same donkey every time they keep referring to it in the Bible. So Seb, the foster father of the child Horus, because of the way that broke out, and that's in the same tale in the Sumerians of Semiramis and Nimrod, and the idea of Demuzzis, which is a Christ figure that they had well before any of this. But Joseph is the foster father of the child Jesus, isn't he? There's little connections here. In your own mind, you can put your stars on there of whatever color, check marks if you want. Seb, Isis, and Horus was this Camite Holy Trinity. It's actually been shown in a lot of art. Wish I could just keep flipping back to pictures, but I would never end this video if I kept doing this. Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, that's that Christian Holy Trinity. Seb was the builder of the house. And this house that they spoke of wasn't in stone, but it was common housing. Now, what's that mean? It was made of wood. So he was a carpenter? Yeah, something like that. Now, Joseph was a carpenter, and Jesus was a carpenter. Everybody's told that. But the actual word tecton that goes on there is something that later gets conflagrated in the idea of masons. Now, one thing that people don't think of whenever they think of masons is, like, before stonework, there was incredible woodworking. These people are making badass boxes. They know how to make certain joints all fit together and everything, carving out. It's amazing. Look at those old wagon wheels and how those were carved out and things like that. And they're all connected. You think the whole thing would just fall apart. Because supposedly it's before they had nails. So they're using pieces of wood like a nail, like dowels and stuff, and boom, 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 and holding it all together. And that crap apparently worked. It got better. But it worked. So He's a carpenter, the custodian of the mummified dead people, Joseph of Arimathea, keeper of the Corpus Christi. Well, that hits me all kinds of ways just in that sentence there. Joseph of Arimathea is Joseph Bar Matthias, pardon me. And that's the name they say that is Josephus Flavius of the Flavian dynasty that Titus is hooked up to and stuff, and I've shown you that connection's there. And you look up the Flavian signature and you might see something where they blended an incredible amount of stories from Josephus's war on the Jews into the New Testament, but that's not for this video. But Joseph Bar Matthias, so one letter off. One thing's for positive here. No one's ever found or heard of a place other than this that's known as Arimathea. People didn't have last names back then, and so therefore it's like Jesus of Nazareth, Joseph of Arimathea. There never was an Arimathea. But Arians and math make a whole lot of sense. But this also has to do with Matthew, by the way. I don't have the time to get into it right now. Let's just continue here. The keeper of the Corpus Christi. See, I live in Texas. When I was a kid, we found out that there was Corpus Christi, Texas, down there right on the coast. We could go to the third coast, you know, where it's not LA and the stuff off of there, and it's not over here off one side or the other of Florida. We have the third coast here. Then there's a name of a famous town that's in Corpus Christi. There's some famous people that came from there, including Janis Joplin and others. But I always thought it was funny that we put names like that, and at that time I found out about that and a few other Christ-like names and biblical names that are thrown here, but you can tell that easily happened because the Christians coming here. And then you find the Nile and Memphis, and then you start to look at the Nile over there in Memphis, and you're like, what? Start to make them a lot of other connections too. But let's just continue. Set and Horus were the twin opponents, and Satan and Jesus are the twin opponents. And so are the very first people in the Bible as brothers. So a lot of times you can go with twins or with brothers. I've talked about how Jesus had a twin brother. In fact, his name means twin brother in two different languages. So they were trying to really point it out and keep it in there. Another odd thing about the Bible is everybody's name means something. Well, that's a Greek thing too. But a lot of people had that over here. Once they named them something, it's different. They get a name. So what was their real name? Well, you don't call people by their real names and stuff a lot in ancient days, where you would grow up and attain a different name, it appears, right? And you would have a certain name from so-and-so, but there got to be so many people from so-and-so. It's really the elite that had this multiple names, and it's usually connecting to two different gods or whatever that they thought had connections to them. It'd be almost like having zodiacal names nowadays or something along that line. I could be Scorpio Africanus because I live in North Africa and I was born in Scorpio, and my first name is Maximus, which just meant big or great. So did this baby not weigh 9 pounds 6 ounces, but he was 10, 11, 12? Is that what's going on? And he got his name from that? Or I don't know. There's a lot to go into there. I don't even want to start it. Don't know why I went off into that field. But the idea here is the Bible has everybody's name in it. Actually means something. And that'll tell you for a fact they didn't really go off real people mainly in the story there. And I say mainly because it's in there sometimes. But has anybody ever noticed how many Josephs there are? And then we're going to flip that into the New Testament, and there's going to be a whole lot of Marys too. And they tell you it was just common name during that time, but he's supposed to have been something special, but he was named something. Well, people nowadays name their kid Jesus or Jesus or whatever off of it. No, it's not like that. It could have been after, but it wouldn't have been before necessarily. Nobody's going to name their kid Son of God, Savior of the world, the Messiah, or anything along that line. Jesus Christ was not his first and second name. Joseph and Mary weren't Joseph and Mary Christ. Might be crazy to think of. So Sut and Horus are twin opponents, but Horus is known as the sower of seeds, and Sut is the destroyer in the harvest field. Sut and Horus contending in the desert. Well, here we have those twin opponents, but Jesus is the sower of the good seed, and Satan is the sower of just tares, the leftovers. Satan and Jesus contending in the wilderness is the same as them contending in the desert. In fact, that's 40 years wandering in the desert. They use that same word interchangeably a lot of times, and they've changed it to wilderness whenever it's not in Egypt. But that area is a desert. I mean, there's an area full there of ancient ruins from the Wayback Machine they don't want to get into, because there's a bunch of them in Central Africa too. And that would make connections to these ancient Natufian people and the pre-proto-Egyptians that I talked about before in other videos. And that ruins their little thing. You can pause this as it goes up. It's going to flash pretty quick here. But whenever it does, you can pause it at any time and take a look at these different connections here, and in your own mind develop your old gold, silver, bronze, stars, maybe a check mark, and things like I was talking about. I'm going to get a check mark. In fact, if I let that music play in the background any longer than I did. So Set and Horus are contending on the bin, or the pyramidion, or the thing that we think of as being on the very key top point of the pyramids. Well, Satan and Jesus contend on the pinnacle too. He takes them up to it, does this, that, and the other. There's a lot of people who've made these connections. Horus was carried off by Sut to the summit of Mount Heter, but you see, that sounds like something that can happen because he's an eagle god, and he can pick him up and carry him off and do things like that. But you know, Jesus was spirited away by Satan to an exceedingly high mountain, and whenever he does, he tries to offer the known world to him, and everybody says, oh, he offers the whole world to him. No, he's talking about the nations right there around him. It's deciphered many times in many ways. Not many places other than the places that are in view right now from this mountain are actually known as a civilization or a nation at this point. All Caucasians that we're talking about here. But just to clarify the point, that he wasn't trying to offer them the whole world. I mean, it's not like any of them speak of Eskimos or Amerindians or, you know, the people in Australia or anything along that line. They're unknown, just like sub-Saharan Africans and so on. Let's continue. So, Semin for Kemin, a title for Thoth, which is strange because out of a way from here, from Thoth, this creative god writing and all these things, can be conflagrated into Simeon, or Simon too. Simeon has held child Horus in his arms as the young solar god. Simeon, who took the Christ child Jesus in his arms. Jesus is also a solar deity in a lot of his aspects, but of course he takes on other pagan beliefs all into one, because they're saying that that is the way the Father is too. And I just made another astrotheological video here recently that shows that whenever they say Jesus and the Father are one, and you know, and they act so strict about it, instead of just calling it three different people in the small trinity that they really truthfully have here, it's because in the star tails in the sky they use the same ones, the same constellations. So whenever they say Jesus and and here he is, and then he's on the right hand side of the throne up here, who is that? Well, that's Aquarius, but also God's in his story sometimes is over here, and here's the Garden of Eden. Here's the Ark in that square. So, Simon, who took the child Jesus into his arms too. I mean, this is written in stone. It's got it on the wall here. Inanna, Anat, a title of Hathor, with Thoth, and at this point it's known as Simon, or Seaman. Seaman. Well, that's Anna, the prophetess, with Simon. Funny how that makes connections too. But then there's Inanna, which all this comes from in a way too. The Petar or Petra, in name of the Egyptian reveler to Horus. Peter, the reveler to Christ, means stone, yet did over here too. And it also means father of the house, who is like a stone. And then people put that together and like, what? The house of Anu. Strange how that is Anu of the Sumerians, in the same situation in the cosmos. But then it's transposed into Bethany, and the group in the house at Anu is the group in the house at Bethany. Then Horus was in Anu, and Jesus ends up in Bethany. Anu and Osirus, Lazarus, and Azarus, and Asar is the ancient name for Horus, for Osiris, and therefore here's another connection of somebody doing the same thing in the same way. I've also showed you in the Astrotheological video here that Jesus was a magician, and they show him using a magic wand. And people thought that Jesus was a magician all the way up into the 1300s, when everybody was getting killed for being witches and even having any kind of magic. It's kind of strange to think of, but David Copperfield would be a wanted man. So there's a whole lot of these guys. And again, you can stop it here and read the whole thing. But there's all these different names, and it's connected with Anu, Anup, a baptizer, all kinds of things here. Just the forerunners of Jesus. And it goes on and on and on. And believe me, there's some gold stars in here that I'm just going to whip on past. Things that you'd be like, there's no way to deny that. Yeah, well, just take the ones we all just go, yeah, that's got to be a gold star, or at least a silver gold star. Well, there's like 37 of them. I ain't got to the end yet. Well, over 100 connections, but you can go, well, that's weak, and try to apologize your right way out of it. And that makes sense too, because that same connotation can be found in other tales at other places. So they get it from here, they get it from there. Where they get it from? Maybe they got it from the ancient Canaanite religion that they came from before they went into the Babylonian captivity, and then got taken and saved by a savior, which was a warrior god and everything, just like they were waiting for here at the end that never happened in Cyrus the Great. But whenever they came back a little different, had a little different play on things, and apparently they learned this wordplay thing pretty good, the Sumerian wordplay. But the Greeks are the ones that were kings of that, and they already had the idea and the connections and everything. It's another reason people say, well, whenever the Septuagint was done in the LXX, where it's 70 people or 72, sacred number, both of them, that put this all together, they did so in a magic cabal way, and making sure it all worked out, and it was written in the stars and everything else, and made so many connections. It's an incredible book once you start to realize all the connections that are coming from everywhere. Like I talk about a web of ancient history and looking at it in a 3D way through time somehow. And it's like 3D chess, and I can't hold all the info at one time here with all the connections that go on. I mean, there's a lot of webs overlapping here and still having connections to other things. But the Bible itself already has its own gigantic web built off into it. It's incredible. It should always be looked at as a marvel, but something that's really no bigger than any epics like the Iliad and the Odyssey and other places that this was actually taken from. Well, actually it is. It's all of that and another story and more. Dun dun dun. New. Coming this summer. Staying for over 2,000 years. It's the Bible. Jesus said he'd be here through the age. I've already shown you how that age is actually hooked up to the zodiacal age. Guess who's entering a new house? And he even said it in the Bible where he talked about, okay, whenever all this ends here, you're going to see a man in a house with a pitcher. And you follow him to a house, and that's where they're going to have that Last Supper. Too many people have shown that that's Aquarius and so on, and that's just one of the easy astrotheological ones. The others that I've been showing here is ones that really are very few were known about until recently, and there's been a couple of guys like McHugh that has gone into it deeper. He studied enough Sumerian to get all of the cross words like the Greeks had done and so on. And lo and behold, he ended up finding a key in a primer, as they say. And in just a spot the size of your hand in the sky, there's hundreds of tales. Keeps going over and over again. It's amazing. Sometimes using some of the other dot-to-dot constellations, sometimes not. So, I mean, there's too many connections. In fact, I said before where maybe we're not showing all of them in 2 pages worth, but it looks here, it speeds up on the way out, and it does probably show all of those connections as it drifts into the other picture. And we really don't need to go into Noah's Ark too much, but I do have another showing of that in the stars. And instead of just saying it plainly, I'll show it. I thought about showing you all the ones that are connected to that boat. That may be boring. It's easier if you go around here, and go, looky here, looky there. Here's Neptune. Here's the god Enki. Here's Yahweh. Here's Jesus Christ walking on water. Here's the Argo from the Iliad and the Odyssey, and here's the whole tale that goes with it going up, and here's the golden fleece, and there's the ram over there. Well, that's supposed to be Colchis and where that happens. Yeah, if you flip it around and make the abyss, the Mediterranean, it kind of hooks up just like that. Now we're back at the point where we were, where I did the original edit, back to the first time that it screwed up and took 2.5 minutes off more than it was supposed to. Not going to end it yet here, Bo. This is things that can be shown in the epic of the Tale of Gilgamesh. In fact, his entire story, hooked up with things that are on the land, and as above, so below. What's that mean? Come on now. But this master of beasts, the chimera that's there, which are actually Lamassu, which actually have the signs of the zodiac on them, and it's pretty self-explanatory from there. It's like, okay, I'm standing on the idea of zodiacs here, and I'm doing this thing. This earliest writing that we can find of that's about 2600 BC, but it goes off much earlier than that. Genesis flood and Gilgamesh flood. Well, it acts like it's a global flood now. And it's stated in their statements like that it was. That the Tigris and Euphrates actually got so overflooded, the Eden land in between became attached. It overflowed the boundaries, and it's strange that there are 2 rivers like this that come not too far apart but never touch until down near the delta. But when this all happened, it flooded all the way through. The Lament of Inanna and other tales talk about this and how it only got about 18 cubits deep, 15 to 18 cubits deep, at the point that where Inanna was at her temple, and they tell the story there, the Lament of her. And the Bible says the exact same thing. But then somebody wrote in another little sentence there, and it says, oh, and over the mountains, and da-da-da. Well, in the Sumerian tale, it tells you the same type of thing, but they don't have any high mountains right there where they're talking about. And they weren't talking about way up there, it went all over the mountains. It came from the mountains. Yeah, let's just go on here. So it was caused by man's sins. Well, in the Sumerian tale, the god Enlil just thought that people were making too much noise and he couldn't sleep. Sounds trivial, but also you could take the God of the Bible thing and sounds trivial too. If he made us, then why are we screwed up enough that he does something? Like has to just wipe the thing off. Well, I was trying to justify what the flood thing was about, but that the Sumerians, we look back at them during that point, and they were a great people during that time. Would we now agree with all the things they were doing and stuff? No. Does anybody do anything from the Bible? When's the last time you sacrificed a goat? You blasphemer. Well, wouldn't it now be sacrificing fish? Let's all go fishing. But this idea was intended for all of mankind, and this flood for man's sins was intended for all mankind, and they tried to, because they want that religion to swallow up everything and it be the one. It's like that all of a sudden turned every one of the gods before, and all the best of it, the top hits. We're going to rewrite that and put it all together and say it's just this one. So eventually they write in the idea, but then you can't find Eskimos and where they possibly come from. And I know the Mormon doctrine and stuff, and trying to figure out, is this a lost tribe of Israel? No. It'd be the only way you could put it in there, though, with the way the story goes, because that's not a true story. There were people all over the planet. Sure, the Amerindians that we know of as Amerindians didn't come in until after the last ice age and stuff, but hey, in the Americas we found people all the way back 32,000 years now. Footprints, another set of footprints real recently in Utah, right there in the Salt Flats, but it looks like they're preemptively just dating it at 10,500 BC or something, so it's like, okay, so you're going to put it at the end of the last ice age and try to give it that Clovis idea so nobody freaks out on you when you put it out. But now they're doing that testing the same way they did it and figured out how to do it and figure out exactly what age it was at the 32,000 dating, and you might be surprised when this shows up, because the Salt Flats were supposed to have gone dry at a certain point, and then of course after they got covered up and then had to dehydrate again, just like Salt Lake. But in this Gilgamesh flood and its connections, he was ordered to build a boat. There was only one door on the boat. There was at least one window. The outside coating is in pitch. The human passengers were family members, all kinds of land animals. The means of the flood was a heavy rain. They released birds to end up finding land. Oh, and here's the thing, not too far from that boat that we see in that astrotheological things that I showed you, vids that I showed you recently, is a constellation known as Corvus. What's that? Now that's the raven. And way over here by Inky over here, and actually out of his range almost, and hooked up with Inanna and her dove, symbology and so on, is this dove. So there they are, kind of in there with it. But then also, hey, here's a weird one. You can conflagrate the name of the Argo, and it turns around and it means dove. What? Yeah, so this wordplay is definitely in effect. And it's 3D chess, along with conflagrating multiple stories in at one time and coming about with something that at least makes enough sense to where people were gobsmacked by it for well over 2,000 years now. There are connections with every single one of these with the idea of Gilgamesh and more. I've got other vids about it that shows you that it was a round coracle, and that's what they're saying, and that actually the measurements on it go off the square of Pegasus, which is the ark, and the same ark is in the Bible, and that leading to a field of 60 meters and so on. And what does that transpose into cubits in feet, and figure it out? And yeah, that Irving Finkel was right. That's it. And so what you're doing is squaring the circle. Well, the numbers aren't quite right. You square the circle, or circle the square, in this case, and lo and behold, there it is. And so whenever Enki went to this reed wall and tells him what to do and how to build the boat, that's just, here it said order to build a boat. Got one window in it, covered with pitch. Now the whole thing is right there, and it goes a lot deeper than most people give any credit for. So it releases the birds on land. The ark landing in a spot was in the mountains. In fact, those mountains are Gemini in the stars, and Ararat in the ancient tale, which is Arata, which is back up the Tigris and Euphrates River. In fact, it's not too far away from Göbekli Tepe. Right after the floods, they did a sacrifice too. And what's weird is in the Sumerian tale is that the gods were almost starving. They needed sacrifice. And so whenever he did the sacrifice, they could smell the burnt meat smell like barbecue going crazy. And they went down there and took part of the sacrifice, and then they said they were never going to do it again, and da-da-da. And here's a rainbow. I mean, it just sounds so familiar. Strange thing is that people look at that and they go, God likes the smell of burnt meat? What are you talking about? One strange thing about that is people that go into space and go on a spacewalk and come back, they go, it smells like burnt meat. But the story is here, just on this one effect of Noah. The story is done in order. And you have that connection idea where once you get to 4 or 5 of these, you just like, ugh, and then somebody keeps talking, they're like, okay, okay, it's just taken directly from it. And then you get to the point and they go, and then they release doves, and then a raven. And a secret thing about that, a maritime people, a dove will be short-ranged and so on, but he actually roosts, and so he comes back. But crows and ravens and stuff actually go long-winded, and they'll fly way up in the sky and see if they see anything in the distance, and if they do, they'll take off. Here's this idea of the crow's nest. You ever hear of it? It's where the guy gets up there looking for land and things in the distance, isn't it? So it all goes together in a maritime way. And then they get blessed after the flood, by the way. I left that last part out here. So here we have a whole concept and Noah and all these things that supposedly happened. But lo and behold, we have this idea of this kid that floats up in a basket. But again, that's stolen from the idea of Nimrod, where he was taken and put into a basket and floated all around. But if I had it pulled up on the star chart, I could show you where this works out, where the kid that was wrapped in swaddling clothes, lied in a manger, and sent down the river. Well, when we were looking at that before with the Jesus Christmas connection. They are right there by the river, the Milky Way, aren't we? Well, so she set it down the river and it went downstream to that person, and oh, it's the same thing. It uses the same stars. Same story. Names have been changed to protect the reality of what it is, not the innocent, but to show you the lack of innocence whenever this was created. This is just like Moses' birth, where he's placed in a basket, set adrift in a river to avoid infanticide. So it's the same concepts and everything, and we're already at that point now where, like, that's 1 in a million or more. Oh, then he was rescued and raised by royalty and turned around and had this thing. Oh, well, okay, yeah, that's... Here we go. There's a lot I could say about Moses, beliefs on him. Sargon's birth, though, he was placed in a basket, set adrift in a river. It was to avoid infanticide because he was someone who they had captured, and it was a concubine's, so it all would have worked out wrong or whatever in the process, and any of those people weren't allowed to be alive, apparently. So therefore rescued and raised by royalty, by Aki, the water bearer. Aki the water bearer. Let me see. Aquarius the water bearer. Aqua. Aki. Man, it's an amazing book. All kinds of ideas out of Moses. You can find Moses had horns when he came down from Sinai. I've talked about that in other vids recently. So this idea of these sacred rites being taught by somebody coming down from the mountain, they get this idea and they talk to the gods, and the gods gave them the laws and stuff. Well, it can go with Manu of India, and that actually has connections into a flood tale too, but not to go into that right now. But also Minos of Crete. Now, Minos of Crete comes from the fact of, or the lineage told by the Greeks, as they tell themselves, and the Minoans, was actually from a woman that rode on a white cow, i.e. Milky Way concept, over there. And her name was Europa, and that's how we get the name of Europe. If we look, though, those Minoan people had a hugely advanced, more advanced than the Greeks at the time, or the Romans, or anybody that we're really looking at in our modern day concept of plumbing and all kinds of neat things. But through that union with Europa, spawned ended up being King Minos. And then you know about the Minotaur and all that, which name comes from that same concept. But I'll tell you again, in the labyrinth of the sky, there is a bull. And here's a guy over here, and he's running down the hallway and doing a thing. And if you want to attach a spool to him, like dot to dot, he can take a string and go all the way through the tail. And if you want, he can unwind the tail and find his way back out. Ding! The idea of Mises of Egypt, where we get the whole Mizraim and stuff like that, comes from the idea in the Bible of who ended up making that over. And then other ones say, well, it's just like Minos, but it's King Menes. Well, people have looked into it, and Menes is more mythological, trying to make a connection, just like the Bible thing does, right, when it uses this Mrs. idea, which if you put an O in there instead of that vowel, you end up with Moses. The Ten Commandments can even be found in the Egyptian lore, but you know, this, and I'm not going to hang my hat on it totally, because people try to act like, well, people didn't know how to act